Hey guys, Guy from Unleash Potential in Halifax, and this video is about crate training. I use crate training for a number of things, primarily it's management. So it's just a way to manage a dog, especially if a dog has behavioral issues or they're young, or in a second. But it's just a way, to manage. I always like to be in a position where I can teach a dog that needs to be taught, that is in the process of being trained. And one of the top ways to manage is if I'm not in a position to teach the dog, then if they're in a crate, they can't get into trouble. With the exception of if they don't like a crate. So you don't just stick a dog in a crate and leave them, in my opinion. You need to properly condition them to the crate so that they're okay with being in a crate and like to be in a crate. Okay? There's a number of reasons throughout their lives. There may be times where they need to be in a crate. So you don't want that to be a really negative experience for your dog. So if your dog needs to go to the vet, for instance, they may end up being in a crate for a while. If something where you need to travel and it was unexpected, and that dog might end up being in a crate. So there are a number of things that may require it throughout the dog's life. And if the dog is not comfortable in a crate, that can be a really terrible experience for your dog. So I like to have the dogs in tune to a crate throughout their whole lives, even if they don't require it anymore. One of the two main things that I also use it for beyond management is house training. So it's a great way to house train a puppy. So most dogs won't relieve themselves in a crate. So it's a great tool to leverage because you need to manage a puppy anyway. So in a crate, you can manage as soon as they come out of the crate, we go outside, relieve ourselves, that kind of thing. And that's a topic for another day, but just to suffice to say, as I definitely leverage the crate to accomplish house training. The other common thing that I use it for is separation anxiety. So ultimately, if I can teach a dog to be alone and in a safe place, the crate is what I want that to be to start, because a lot of dogs with separation anxiety can also be destructive and have issues in that regard. So if I give them a comfortable place to be and condition them to it, it's a great place for them to be and feel safe in the end when it's all over, but it's also a great way for them to learn to be alone, which is the whole point of separation anxiety. So the crate is basically my first step with every new dog, whether it be a puppy or an adult dog that comes to me for board and train or comes into our rescue that we're going to rehab and find a new home for. It's also what I recommend to clients. If they have a dog with issues in the house especially, then the first step is we need to crate train the dog. So that's my first step with everything. So if it's my first step with everything, and it's a dog I need to crate train that isn't okay in a crate, I'm going to teach them my marker system throughout. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is you're going to see me when I bring a dog in and start going through this process. I'm going to be using markers. And those, my 3 verbal markers are: good means you're doing it right, keep doing it. Break means you're doing it right or you just did it right and I'm releasing you. And the last one is no, which is just a verbal marker to let a dog know that they're doing something incorrect and they don't get rewarded for it until they do it properly. So you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong, and when you're doing it right, are you being released from that or are you asked to continue doing it? So that's the difference between good and break. So you're going to hear me saying those words. I just want you to know what they're for. If you plan on doing further obedience with your dog, you can just leverage what I do here as far as the markers and the words you're going to see and in context, and that can extend to the rest of your training. Okay, so just so you know what those are. So I'm going to use this crate today. This is, I guess, a shout out, if you will. This is a Zinger Winger crate. This one actually is typically in the back of our SUV. It's actually a modified version. It's got 2 doors. There's a side door on the side too that you can't see, but I'll just use the end door. It's like an airplane grade aluminum. It's actually surprisingly light. I know it looks like it probably isn't, but it is. But it's very, very, very well made crate, obviously. So I'm going to be using this today, but obviously whatever crate you're using, you know, a wire crate or a plastic crate or a soft crate, whatever it is, if your dog's okay with the crate, what it's made of really, you know, shouldn't matter if you go about it. We happen to have a dog, and we've seen this before, and that's why I'm using this crate and why I'm bothering mentioning it is, if you have a dog that had issues with crates before, and you're now teaching them, so they've busted out of crates or that kind of thing, they've kind of learned that they can bust out of crates. So there are times when, even though you go through the process properly and you crate train a dog, if a dog knows they can get out, it almost becomes a game. You know, I know how to get out of this thing, so I'm going to. Even though I'm comfortable in this crate, I can get out of this. So it's one advantage of a crate like this, if you have a dog like that, is if they should decide, hey, I know how to get out of a crate, even if they're cool in a crate at this point. Because if they're not cool in a crate, then, you know, you're going about it wrong, okay? But if a dog just knows they can get out of a crate, if they should try it, something like this, they're not going to get out. So it's quick for the dog to go, okay, I guess I can't get out of a crate anymore. But they're of the mindset that they're okay in a crate, so it's really not an issue. Okay, you don't want a dog freaking out on a crate, trying to bust its way out and all that kind of stuff. That's just mean and horrible for the dog, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm gonna go get a dog, and we're gonna start crate training. So I'll show you how that works. So this is my little girl River, and we're gonna go through the process with her crate training, and kind of show you how that's done. So the first thing I typically do is, food's a big thing in this, so I typically feed them this way. Okay, so when I start with a dog in a crate, this may not be an instant thing. You know, I may need to manage them outside of the crate until they're okay with the crate. So this might go over the course of a really long time, especially if you have a dog with separation anxiety. This is not, you know, do this and spend, you know, an hour doing it, now the dog's okay in a crate. It's definitely not that way. You have to get the dog comfortable in a crate, and if a dog is not comfortable in a crate, you don't know how long that's going to take. Okay, River, come here. It's going to take as long as it takes. You have to go at the speed that the dog will accept. Okay, because you're trying to get them over whatever fears or insecurities they may have or anxiousness about the crate. Okay, and in the case of separation anxiety, it goes obviously beyond that, the fear of being left alone. So, but regardless, the process is the same. All it is with each dog, you don't know how quickly they're going to get it. You don't know how quickly you're going to be able to progress, especially the point where you start to try and leave them alone. Okay, and we'll talk about that coming up. So the first step is, I don't call it anything. So what I typically start doing is just throwing food in and getting the dog to go in and get it and come out, right? So that's really all it is. If I have a dog that won't chase the food in because they're that apprehensive of going in the crate, I'll lure them into the crate and then get them out right away, okay? But typically, most dogs that are food motivated, especially, you know, if you're feeding them this way, then they should be hungry. So what I'm basically doing is, the dog knows I have food, I'm throwing it in the crate, and the dog goes to get it, and then I say, break, and feed them on the way out. Okay, so my break is release, right? So you're allowed out is really what I'm priming here. Even if the dog doesn't know it, they'll associate it very, very quickly. Break. Okay, if I had to, I'd lure the dog in with the food. Okay, so I'd have to kind of reach in. Good. Great. And then reward on the way out. Okay, if I had to do something like that, so I must have to get in. She's a little confused because she's beyond that. But if you have a dog that's really apprehensive, even sticking their head in, even, you know, to this degree here, right, just to get them in if they're that apprehensive of doing it. Baby steps if you have to. But if you can get away with this right off the get-go, break. Right? So the break is just, hey, you're allowed out, hey, you're allowed out, hey, you're allowed out. Once I can get this consistently, for the dog to go in and chase the food, break. Okay? Then I want to name it. I happen to use kennel, is the word I use, just because I'm trying to do markers at this point, and the dog may or may not be able to differentiate between the word crate, if I was using crate, and the word break, which is my release. I know they're quite different, but I just don't want to take the chance, so I just use a word that it doesn't even sound the same, so I tend to use kennel, right? So what I'll do is, before I throw the food in, I'll just say the word. So I'm going to go kennel, break, kennel, break. So I'm instantly saying break and getting the dog out. I'm not even giving them the chance to sort of try to come out on their own, okay, at this point, because I don't want to hold them up. I don't want to be using the door or anything at this point. Kennel, break, okay? So once I get to that point, and I do enough repetition, the dog will know the words. What I'm going to try and do is say kennel and get the dog going in and then feeding them after they're in as opposed to luring them in. So I'm trying to get rid of the lure, okay? And that takes a bunch of repetition. Okay. Kennel. Great. Kennel. Great. Now I'm going to start introducing the word good, which means you're doing it right, keep doing it. So I'm going to just get her used to staying in there once she's in there, now that she'll go in on command. Kennel. Good. Good. So I'll keep feeding her as long as she's staying in there. Good. Break. Ooh. So break means you're allowed out. Okay? Kennel. Good. 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 Break. So if she was going to try and bolt out, I would kind of block her, right? So now she's going in on her own. Okay? Kennel. Good. Break. And I just do a random number of goods so she doesn't start to anticipate how many before she's allowed to come out. Okay? Once I can get that, and I do probably a few sessions of that, then I'll start to incorporate the door. Okay? So at any time if she tries to come out, whether previous to using the door or when you see me start using the door, I'll start marking with no. Okay? So I'll block the dog's ability to come out with no, and then they don't get the reward, and then I'll try to give them the opportunity to stay in and mark that with good and reward until I release them. The easiest time to do that is with the door. Okay, so I usually wait till that point because I can shut the door and say no, and it gives it, you know, a whole lot of meaning, obviously. Right? So kennel, good. Feed through the door, good girl. So I want to get the dog used to not bolting when the door's open. Break. So if she tried to bolt out there, I would say no, and I'd literally close the door on her. So she realizes just because the door's open doesn't mean I'm allowed to come flying out. I still have to wait for this break word. Okay? Kennel. Good. 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 Break. So it's just a succession of that. And what will happen is you'll start to close the door for longer periods of time. After a few sessions, kennel. Good. 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 Nope. Good. Great. Alright, so I don't want when I open the door the dog to come flying out, so I use that to my advantage. So this is over I don't know how many sessions, of course, as long as the dog gets it. So you progress as long as the dog will let you. If the dog starts screwing up too much, take a step back and do more repetitions. Okay? It's especially when you get to the door. If you got a dog that has issues with a crate, closing the door can be a big deal. It doesn't bother her, obviously, but it can be a big deal. So if the dog starts getting whiny and anxious and what have you, just wants to get out of the crate, do a lot more exercises with the door open until you get to the point where you can try the door again and see. You're just trying to get the dog used to being in the crate. Okay? So once you can get the door closed for a little while, start to step away from it. Okay, great. Kennel? Good. Good. Okay. So I'm just going to step away from it a little bit. Good. Keep coming back and rewarding. Good. I want the kennel to be a wonderful place to be. And food will do that. I will basically feed the dog its meals this way. So I would do this a couple of times a day if they eat twice a day or just throughout the day. Good. Good. And the repetitions between each good will just slowly become longer and longer. And I'll start to sort of get away from the dog and somewhat even out of sight is basically the next progression. Okay, good. Break. Okay, so always have food ready when you open that door. Because that's something you want to just drill and drill and drill and drill long after the dog's okay with the crate. Okay, there's got to be something in it for the dog to be obedient. So if you stay in the crate and don't bolt out the door, I'll reward you for that in some way, shape, or form. Okay? And in house training, that could be just going outside to relieve themselves. That is rewarding in itself. Okay? So, but I usually associate that with food too. So eventually the steps are going to be, is I'll just have longer and longer and longer in the crate with me present and the door closed and longer times with gradual increases between coming back, marking with good, and rewarding. If the dog gets anxious at any time during that process, you've pushed too far. You need to go back to a length of time or distance away or time in the crate or distance between repetitions that the dog is comfortable with. That's really all you need to do. Good. Okay? Then you'll come to a point where the dog can be in the crate and between repetitions can be several minutes. Right? You're going to build up, build up, build up, build up, where you can sit in the room and sort of read a book a little bit and the dog's okay in the crate. Okay, and you can set that up in different places in your house or it's a little bit more convenient to make that happen. But ultimately, you probably want to do this wherever the crate is going to end up. Okay, so if there's a specific place that that crate's going to be, I would probably do that training there. Because moving the crate itself at some point during the process can sort of stump things up a little bit and set you back a little bit. You almost have to go back a few steps, just believe it or not, because the crate's in a different place. So get the dog used to the crate and its surroundings. Good. Okay, so when you get to the point where you can sit down and read or do things or watch TV or whatever it is you're doing for prolonged periods of time, and the dog is okay with it, when every once in a while, whatever that time frame you're up to, it could be every 20 minutes or so, you're just coming back and reassuring if the dog has made it up to that. So there's no set number of minutes. It's go and try increasing based on the dog and what the dog will actually be comfortable with and let happen. Every dog is different. So I'm really not a big fan of the set intervals. I think you just need, every dog is different. You need to go with what the dog will give you. Okay? So you hear her a little bit of whining stuff. That's just her being excited. It's not an anxiety thing at all. So the next step would be to start leaving the room. Okay, so that's really hard for me to demonstrate, but I would just start opening the door to whatever the room is or just getting out of sight. And at first it's just getting out of sight, coming right back, opening up the door, letting the dog out, or reinforcing through the door if that's something that you can do. Okay? So you just start doing that and leaving the room and increasing that interval, the ability of the dog to be left into the room, and you increase that. But the dog probably still knows you're still in the house or apartment or whatever it is you're doing. You're just not in the room. So that in itself is a huge step, okay? And if it doesn't go well, you need to come back and do more repetitions to where you had success. So still in the room for longer periods of time. When you get to the point where you can leave the room and increase that, then the next one is mimicking you actually leaving the house. So for both of those things, what I highly recommend you do when you can't actually see the dog and possibly hear the dog is to set up a camera system. Okay? So I'm going to show you one. This is one that we use. We've got actually a number of them. This is actually a 2-camera system. It can be expanded to 4. But these cameras just plug in and point, and they're night vision, so you can do this at night. So if the dog is somewhere at night and you get it to that point where the dog's spending the night and in the dark or low light, your cameras can still pick it up. We have a handheld unit that basically through the screen I can see or go through the cameras. Good. Right, so I can see and go through the cameras. And when you start leaving the room, you can start watching. When you start leaving the house, you can start watching. Quiet. Good. Okay. So I'm just going to let her out. No. Break. Good girl. Right, so I'm going to, when you have something like this, the other options are there's internet security cameras you can basically buy, some pan and zoom and do the whole thing. But you can log in to them from a smartphone. So you can angle them to the crate, and when you're out of the house, you can actually, log in. So you can log in locally on your Wi-Fi network or in the house, or when you leave, you can do so through the internet. So some of them even have 2-way sound systems. So some you can just hear, so if the dog was being vocal, you'd know about it because you could hear it. Some have 2-way, where there's a microphone on, let's say, the phone or tablet or whatever you're using, and a speaker system on the other side, so you can actually talk back to the dog. So if your dog knows a quiet command or you can reassure them or whatever, then that might be an option. Okay, so that's what I would suggest you do is when you get out of sight is have the ability to see and hear the dog so you know what's going on when you're not there. All right, and I can't emphasize this enough, but you need to go at the pace that the dog accepts. So if you work 8 hours a day and you need a dog to be in a crate for 8 hours, okay, you need to do setups that build up to that time where you're watching the dog and have the ability, if the dog should start to show any kind of signs of distress or anxiousness or fear or whatever the problem is, to come and interrupt that, right? And you'd have to do that several times. Just because you can get 8 hours of a dog on one day doesn't mean they're going to do the same tomorrow. There's a build-up as you kind of do this. So a good indication for stuff like that would be overnight. But ultimately, whatever time frame you're going to need from the dog, you need to practice and rehearse that several times and be successful doing it before you put yourself in a scenario where you leave the dog and you know you don't have the ability to come back and do anything about it if the dog has issues. You want to make sure there are no issues at all whatsoever for a predetermined amount of time, and you've successfully done that several times before you set yourself up where you don't have the ability to come back. Okay? So that's how you properly go about crate training. That's how you deal with separation anxiety. That's how you deal with house training with a puppy, is they're going to have time frames that they can hold it. So when you're not working with them, they're in a crate. They're typically not going to want to mess in the crate, so you can take them out at those intervals that they're capable of holding. Last note on the crate, size. A crate for a dog should be big enough for them to walk into, turn around and lay down, okay, and be comfortable. So what I normally suggest is about a dog and a quarter or so, or a dog and a half length of the dog, not including the tail, is sort of a rule of thumb. So they need to be able to walk in, stand up, turn around, and lay down. Okay. Now, if there's a door with a little bit of overhang, they might have to duck to go in. That's fine, but they should be able to stand in the crate. Okay. So hopefully that helps, and happy crate training.